Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Blood on the Razor Wire TV. Post-Incarceration Syndrome. Have you ever heard of it? Perhaps not. Perhaps you've only heard of PTSD. Perhaps you have a loved one coming home from prison, someone you care about, someone that matters to you. Perhaps this person has done 10, 15, 20, 30 years in prison. And sometimes you might think that everything's going to be okay. But you need to know that that person that you love that is leaving prison, they're damaged. Post-incarceration syndrome. Unless we have been in prison ourselves, it's difficult to understand exactly what inmates go through, both during and after their time behind bars. When someone is in prison, they get used to the conditions, as harmful and abusive as they may sometimes be. The conditions may begin to wear on an individual, leaving them feeling like they have nowhere to turn. If someone experiences these struggles during or after their prison sentence, they may have a disorder called Post-Incarceration Syndrome, or Pics, P-I-C-S. What is Post-Incarceration Syndrome? Post-Incarceration Syndrome is a mental disorder that affects people who are currently incarcerated or were released from prison recently. All individuals who have been in prison are at risk for this disorder. But those who have experienced trauma during their prison sentence may be more likely to develop the syndrome and have more intense side effects. For example, people who were forced into solitary living situations in prison or were a victim of institutional abuse are likely to experience the severe mental and emotional turmoil that typically is associated with post-incarceration syndrome. Since post-incarceration syndrome is a mental illness, most of its symptoms have to do with one's thoughts and the behaviors they display after having these thoughts. Here are some of the most common side effects or traits that someone with Pics may experience. PTSD, trauma before or during life in prison, may result in post-traumatic stress disorder. Individuals who struggle with PTSD may frequently relive past events in their minds and have sudden outbursts. This is true. I've experienced myself. Nobody's perfect, and some of us struggle. Perhaps you have a loved one that recently came home from prison. He wants to sit with his back to the wall so he can see everybody that walks into the restaurant. Perhaps they're jumpy at Walmart, looking around behind them, watching everybody. This is part of the life that we lived. This is part of the damage that we experience. And what is it from? It's from the way that we lived, the violence that we seen, the things that we experienced, perhaps the violence that we participated in. And sometimes it's not violence that we wanted to participate in, but necessary in the prison environment. And it damages us. And I can tell you now, sometimes there's things that I can watch on YouTube or on videos, and I get broke up. It breaks me. Sometimes we're broken, and we're looking for you to help us put ourselves back together. Institutionalized traits. While in prison, a person's personal nature and critical thinking abilities may be stripped away from them. This could result in a personality switch or a loss of interest in activities that the person once enjoyed. Antisocial traits. A lot of time in prison is spent alone. When inmates aren't alone, they only have the company of guards and fellow inmates. If they face abuse from these people, they may begin to develop an antagonistic and antisocial point of view. Many of us do. Sensory deprivation. It's normal to feel lost after going through sensory deprivation. The effects of living without any contact from the outside world can take a mental toll on an individual in prison. Other side effects of post-incarceration syndrome, which may tie in with traits above, including feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, fear, isolation, and anger or rage. There have been times since my release where I felt helplessness, hopelessness. No matter how much money I made or what I had, I was always fearing that I had to take care of things. I had to pay bills. I had to be responsible. Having 2 kids, most recently and before that, made me feel like I had to be responsible, and I wasn't sure if I could be. Was it prison that done that? How many of you live with someone who came home from prison and there's fear I used to sleep with a knife for many, many months in my hand at night. Isolation. How many people have a father or a husband or a daughter or a wife or a sister that feel like sometimes they just want to be alone? This is the damage that prison has caused us. How many have dealt with someone that goes into a fit of anger or rage over something small, somebody bumping into them at McDonald's? Have you seen your husband get mad or angry over something so small? The connection between Pics and substance abuse. Unfortunately, many people with Pics develop a substance abuse disorder, even if they did not previously have one. This is likely because current and former inmates turn to drugs in order to self-medicate after experiencing trauma or abuse in prison. These individuals were cut off from the real world, deprived from normal human experiences like honesty, humility, self-awareness, and self-care. Therefore, they are usually not provided with the tools they need to cope with mental illness or emotional issues that they are facing. When someone doesn't have the appropriate coping mechanism to get through something, they may turn to drugs for a temporary sense of comfort. How many videos have we done where you've seen this? Where you've heard this? You just seen K Solo, Jason. The other day he said that sometimes he just wishes he was back in prison because it was easier. I've told you plenty of times that so many men grow physically, but not mentally. Sometimes we're stuck. Treating post-incarceration syndrome. If you or someone you know is suffering from post-incarceration syndrome, the first step is to enroll in therapy. Once someone has advice from a trained professional, they can begin to work on overcoming their illness. Inpatient rehabilitation is another obvious option for those who are experiencing substance abuse, along with Pics. I'm not embarrassed to tell you that I have 2 different counselors that I go to each month because I needed it. Because I was suffering, and still suffer at times, from post-incarceration syndrome. Perhaps your loved one is too. The main way to prevent post-incarceration syndrome is to improve faults in the prison system. Currently, inmates do not have immediate access to programs that could help them transition into the real world more seamlessly. Things like education, career training, job development, and rehab programs in prison could make a world of difference for these individuals. But so many times we're deprived of that. We're broken. Many of us come home broken. And many of us are working to get better. Sometimes we just need a push. Sometimes we'll fall down. Sometimes we'll fail. But we ask that you help pick us up. Let us dust it off the dust and keep walking forward. This is our long walk. Our long walk to freedom. Not just from prison, but from the prison within ourselves. What's up, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Blood on the Razor Wire TV, where we bring it to you real and we bring it to you raw. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, share the video, and leave a comment. I got a lady coming on today that's been involved in the medical field for a long time, majority of her life. She worked in some very dangerous places inside of the New York State prison system. But I'll let Jean come on and introduce herself, and she'll tell you a little bit about who she is and some of the places that she worked. Jean, the microphone's yours.
Okay, well, basically I'm coming on to talk to you about my time at Shawangunk Correctional Facility in Walkville, New York. But prior to that, I worked at Dutchess County Jail in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I also worked in a level 3 trauma center, also in Poughkeepsie, New York, St. Francis Hospital, which is now called Mid-Hudson Regional, and a couple other different places. But I've been a nurse 32 years, and now I'm a family nurse practitioner out of Poughkeepsie, New York. But my time at Shawangunk was interesting because I was there for almost 3 years, and that was the first place I ever worked at where I actively had a doctor tell me to mind my own business and don't take care of the patients.
Wow, isn't that something?
Yeah.
So you work in New York State Prison, you're at Shawanga, and there's some people over there, like David Berkowitz was incarcerated over there, right?
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about him.
He was crazy. He was an old man, but a lot of the guys who were in there were old, and but we had some young guys who were in. I guess what got me was a large majority of the guys that were in there were really old felons, old felons. But we had guys that were in there incarcerated for minor stuff like drug possession and stuff like that, and crimes that were committed without weapons. And there were these guys who were really bad murderers and things. And I don't know. It just seemed to me like to be incarcerated for 25 years for carrying 3 ounces of marijuana seemed like a little overkill.
What made you want to go work in a prison, especially that one? Because I'm from New York. I know that's a dangerous place.
I worked at the Dutchess County Jail, and I sort of felt like being a nurse is sort of a calling, and you work where you work where you work. And I had worked in a trauma center. I had the benefit of being a trauma nurse and taking care of people that were injured and people that had major medical problems. I also had cardiac background and ICU background and PCU background, which is critical care. So I felt like I could utilize my knowledge there, and I could help, and I could take care of people with chronic illnesses. And a lot of the guys at the jails, believe it or not, we had older inmates, and at Shawangunk, we definitely had older inmates, and a lot of them had major medical problems. So I felt I could be utilized there for a good cause or good use. And I really liked taking care of the guys. I really did. I don't look at them as, inmates or bad people. I looked at them as my patients. I looked at them as people with medical problems, and I like taking care of them,
And it didn't really always work out that way, did it?
No, not always.
So
had some bad situations happen, and some of the things that I took care of after I left deteriorated to the point where people got hurt and left with kidney damage and renal failure and liver failure and major infections, and people died from them, and stuff that I used to send people out for that other nurses wouldn't send people out for. I had guys tell me that I saved their lives, and people after me wouldn't bother, and the patients got sicker and sicker. Yeah, it was a bad scene.
So when you get guys that come down to medical and you're like, wow, like right now we got a big snowstorm. You get a guy comes down to medical and he's sick and he needs to go out. And you say, you know what, I'm going to send this guy out. Did the cops, the lieutenants, the people in charge, anybody ever get pissed off at you for stuff like that?
Yeah. I sent him out anyway. My nickname was Send Him Out Vodka, and I would send him out. I would just say to the lieutenant, they're going out. Well, did you call the doctor on call? Yeah. Well, did you tell them they had to go out? Yeah.
New York State Prison is known for a lot of corruption. In the sense where the cops will beat up the prisoners. I spent many years of my life there as well. Went from there to federal prison. You ever witness cops come down to medical and, slap a guy around, punch him, do anything like that?
Yes. But I would they would tell me to step away, back away, and I would say, well, no, not if you're going to hit these people, there's got to be a legit reason for it. And not in the infirmary. If I was up in the infirmary and a patient acted out, if I couldn't talk them down, they would go in. But usually I could talk an inmate down. There was only one case where an inmate really got in my face, and they had like 20 COs come down. But like I told you, 5 inmates were there too, and they got in front of me, between me and the guy, and the inmate backed down just because of the inmates. He didn't back down because of the officers. He backed down because of the inmates.
So you ever seen the cops like beat someone down in that prison system, where the guy's screaming and yelling for help, or?
I saw a guy get beat down after the fact. They broke his neck and they fractured his skull, and I sent him out. They weren't going to send him out, but I sent him out. And I knew he had a fractured neck. And I said to the guys, he was sitting in a chair, and I said to the patient, you need to calm down. You need to not move your head. And I said to the guys, I said, get me a collar. And they said, where? I said, up in the top there, because I put my hands around his neck, and I held his neck in place. I said, get me a collar. And they said, I said, get me a collar. And they said, okay. So they got the collar, I put it around his neck. And I said to the nurse that was there, I said, call an ambulance. And she says, because his eye was popping out. And I said, call the ambulance now. And she was like, oh, we go. I said, call the ambulance now. I need to tell him that. I said, you can tell him that, but you need to call the ambulance too.
So the cops do, I mean, it's not just stories that we hear. I mean, this shit really happens, right?
No, this really happened. He was hurt.
Why did the cops?
The other thing was they framed one of my other friends who was a really good CO who tried to intercede for the patient. They framed him for the beatdown, and he didn't have anything to do with the beatdown.
Did he end up going to jail for it?
No, he ended up losing his job for it. He went back to school and became a nurse. So.
Wow, that's something. You ever have the cops retaliate against you when you worked there?
Yep.
Tell us about it. Tell us what happened.
Well, one of them thought I was trying to date her boyfriend, which was really stupid because he worked with me up in SHU, which is special housing unit. You know that, right?
Yeah.
When I worked up in the infirmary, we had to take care of the SHU inmates. So I would go up to SHU and I would take care of the inmates up in SHU. And the officer that went with me was named Eric, and he was a really good guy, but I had no interest in him at all. She thought I was trying to date him, so she slashed my tires. That was the first one. And then the next time, the sergeant came down and told me I had to sign off on something. And I said, no, I'm not signing that. Well, you have to do that. You have to do that. I said, no, I don't. And he said, well, this is you. I said, no, I didn't do anything. And I was not involved. I'm not signing that. If you want a day nurse to sign it, get the day nurse. I'm not signing it. I wasn't involved. I disagreed with it. I sent the patient out. I'm not signing that. My tires were slashed that night.
Have they ever wanted you to sign off on something where they did something brutal to a prisoner and they wanted you to, say, hey, look, the prisoner got out of line, you witnessed it, and, they had no other recourse but to do some type of physical damage to the prisoner?
Yeah, I refused to do that. That was in the infirmary. It was in the waiting room, and they tried to drag a patient back to his cell because the patient got out of line waiting for his meds. And I said, just stop, leave him alone. And they dragged him back to his cell, and they wouldn't let him get his meds. And I told him, I said, once he calms down, because I don't agree with what you did, bring him back for his meds. And they wouldn't. I had to get the lieutenant involved, and then they wanted me to sign off that the patient got out of line, and I wouldn't sign off on it. And I told the lieutenant that I was afraid they were going to slash my tires again. And he said, move your car to the under the lights here in a certain spot. So I had to go out and move my car, and he watched my car that night. And after that, I had to park in a certain location so he could watch my car.
Let's talk a little bit about the corruption inside the New York State prison system. Sometimes them cops get into it with each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
You ever witness cops fighting each other or threatening each other in there?
Only has it was if they were defending like inmates. Like one time, my friend David, who's a really good CO, and he always worked on the outside. He worked with the inmates outside doing the lawns and stuff because he said he felt safer out there. And he would work upstairs in the infirmary with me if I was on because he felt safer if I was on. But he got threatened because he was older, and he got threatened by some of the younger guys. But he would just come out, go back outside and stay outside because he said it was safer. And I said, what do you mean by safer? He says, you don't want to know. And he never really talked about what he meant. But I got the impression that he got threatened by, other officers. And my friend Anthony that left, he was threatened by officers in the time that he was there before he left. He was threatened that he had to say certain things, otherwise he would get taken out.
Is there kind of like a code of silence, so to speak, amongst the cops and the prison staff? Like if you hear nothing, you see nothing kind of thing?
Yep.
Do they let you know that when you first start working there, or do you just kind of get that impression, or do they be like, hey?
No, they let you know that.
What do they tell?
My brother was a CO. So the word went down that, her brother's a CO, so she knows it.
Let's talk a little bit about I want to go back to David Berkowitz. You ever have to take care of him? Did he ever come down to medical for issues and stuff like that?
Yeah, he came down. He came down a couple times for meds. He came down because he wanted to go on sick call, and I wrote up a sick call slip for him. And I just said to him, just incidentally, why didn't you come down on day shift and get your sick call slip on day shift? And he said, because they told me I couldn't come. And I said, why not? And he said, too much notoriety. And I said, that's bullshit. Just come down.
So there was times when he wasn't allowed to.
Yeah, I'm just going to come down on your shift if that's okay. Because me and the other nurse, Lisa, were like, okay, come down on our shift.
How was he when you talked to him? Was he kind of like a nice guy or what?
He was okay. I mean, he didn't seem anything real. You could tell he was crazy, but he didn't seem off the wall crazy.
I want to talk to you about that because I'm sure over there, did they have a mental health unit over there?
No.
Did they have some guys that needed to be in a mental health unit, you think?
Yeah. They had a sexual offenders unit.
How was that unit? I mean, were guys over there doing things that they shouldn't have been doing?
I have no idea. All the other inmates looked down on him and called him the pervert unit.
Were other guys beating those guys up or just letting them live?
They had their own separate yard. So I would assume that if they went into the other yards, they would get beaten up.
In a New York State prison, they do a lot of cutting with razor blades, right?
I don't know. They called it getting shanked. And I don't know. I only saw one patient get shanked, and he wouldn't tell me how it happened. He told me he got bit. But it was obvious he got shanked. So I patched him up really good. He had to go out for stitches. I think he got like 40 stitches.
So you never seen anybody get cut with a razor blade on their face?
No, the one guy that got that happened before I got there, and he died in the hallway.
No, ain't that something? Let's talk a little bit about prisoners, because from your medical, experience, people that get out of prison, do you think they're affected by PTSD?
Oh yeah, sure.
What do you know about PTSD? Can you tell me a little bit about it? Do you know anything about it?
Yeah, when I was in the military, they talked about it a lot. I had a guy that came out of Iraq, and I had him in the jail, in the Dutchess County jail, and he had PTSD, and it would happen to him at night at the jail. And if anybody tried to help him when he had a nightmare or something, he would attack them. And so he got in a lot of trouble for that. And I said, no, it's PTSD. You got to leave him alone and let him come out of his dream on his own. And they would say, well, how do you know it's PTSD? How do you know it's PTSD? I said, because he tells me that a helicopter comes through the ceiling of his room. I said, that's PTSD. I said, if something like that happens to somebody, it's PTSD. If they have like a panic attack in the middle of the dining hall, okay, and they think that somebody's going to attack them, just by the way they're looking at them from something, it's a flashback of some sort, okay, that's PTSD, okay? You can't just say, oh, they're just going to attack me because they feel like it. Something happens, it triggers something, that's a PTSD attack. I said, and, his PTSD got so bad that he attacked his wife, and he wound up back in the jail, and he wound up hanging himself.
Wow, suicide. Is that something that happens a lot over there?
I didn't see it at Shawangunk. I did see it at Dutchess County Jail a couple of times. The aftermaths were pretty bad. I know 2 patients that survived and wound up in the neuro unit. As far as I know, they didn't come back from the attempts.
So have you ever seen anybody or had to respond when, a guy hangs himself in New York State prison or cuts his wrist or anything like that?
Yeah, they wouldn't let us go in, but I used to go in. One guy tried to hang himself up in shoe, and I went in with the officers. What's
it like to find a guy that's, hanging from the light fixture or from the bed? I mean, is it shocking?
He wasn't hanging from the light fixture. They would do it so that they would be not noticeable. He hanged himself from the vent in the room, off of the vent, like low, with a sheet.
Did he die?
And, it wouldn't have been noticeable, but the officer that was making the rounds went into the cell to make the rounds, and he saw him, and that's when he called it. And we got him down before any damage really happened. But I sent the guy for psych. I'm one of the few nurses that used to send the guys out for psych evals. A lot of the nurses wouldn't.
What do you think the general consensus is in New York State prison as far as prisoners go? Do you think that people don't give a shit about them. They think they're dogs. They treat them. I mean, tell the people about that.
I think it depended a lot on the nurse, but I saw a lot of nurses that really, despite having years of training and despite being years as a nurse, really had no heart, really didn't care, really could give a shit. And a lot of the nurses on day shift didn't care. It was really sad. I felt really bad. Lisa and I think we were two of the nurses that really gave a shit. She worked in the prison system in California. So she saw, she knew prisoners and, she cared. And she was a great nurse too. And when the lawyer approached us to go because we were going to testify. I testified. She was going to testify also on this urinary tract thing. They threatened to take her, and they couldn't do this. You can't threaten a nurse that you're going to take her license if she testifies for a doc's patient. You can't threaten a nurse if you're going to take her license. But they scared her so bad that she won't even talk to me anymore. Okay, and she's a good nurse. She's a fantastic nurse. But she's going for her nurse practitioner. And she was so afraid that they were going to do something to her getting a nurse practitioner license that she wouldn't testify.
So what happened with this? A guy ends up dying and then they sue. Tell the people a little bit about that incident.
No, he wound up with severe kidney damage and renal failure because he had chronic urinary tract infections. Because in this prison system, this is really bizarre. I took care of two paraplegics, okay? He's paralyzed from the waist down. So those guys have to self-cath, they have to catheterize themselves with urinary catheters, with single-use urinary catheters is what we got them. But in the prison system, the doctor wrote the order for them to use a single-use catheter over and over again. And in the cells in the prison system, they don't have hot water, a lot of them. In Shawangunk, they didn't have hot water, okay? And with the single-use catheter, you're not supposed to wash it and use it again. It's single-use. That means one-time use only, okay? And a doctor can write an order, but if it's single-use only, good nursing judgment says use it once, okay? And that's what you use it for, okay? So I gave these guys enough catheters to get them through 7 days, okay, a week. I gave them enough catheters for every time they had to go to the bathroom, which would be, if they had to go regularly, it would be every 4 hours. You have to cath yourself. And that's being conservative. Most guys, if you drink a lot of fluids, and I wanted my guys to drink plenty of fluids, would have to cath themselves every 2 to 3 hours. But these guys would go 4 to 6 hours cathing themselves, okay? So this guy would go 4 to 6 hours and he would cath himself. And I would give him plenty of soap, plenty of betadine to make sure. Well, the doctor limited him to one soap packet a week, one betadine scrub a day. He should have had 7, okay, and one catheter a day. He should have had 7 a day, or 4 a day, okay? So the poor guy wound up with chronic urinary tract infections. And so he would come to the infirmary when I was on, tell me he was peeing cloudy urine or he was having pain from a urinary tract infection. I would start him on an antibiotic. I'd come in the next day, he'd be off the antibiotic, okay? So he'd have the urinary tract infection untreated. So I would put him back on the antibiotic. I'd come in the next day, he'd be sicker but off the antibiotic. I'd bring him up to the infirmary, start him back on the antibiotic. The doctor would come in the next day, and it would go on and on and on. So finally, I would ship him out. And he'd go on IV antibiotics, be hospitalized for a week, come back to the infirmary, be on the IV antibiotics with me, and then finally be on oral antibiotics, and we get rid of the urinary tract infection. For something that could have been treated by just him having catheters, so he could cath himself. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks, okay? Once I left, this guy wound up with renal failure and kidney damage because this doctor went back to doing it the old-fashioned way, okay? And the other guy that had the same problem, a younger guy, he was younger at night, is 60, I think, 65, something like that. The younger guy's 48, and he wound up with permanent damage too. I think he wound up dying. I don't know.
What a nasty-ass doctor, but I've been there. I've been in New York State prison, so I know how it goes. But why would the doctor do that? To save money, or just because he's just a nasty person?
I don't know. I would have guys that would come down to me on sick call who had been suffering all day. One guy had diverticulitis, okay? And he'd been suffering. I was off for 2 days, okay? I had the weekend off, okay? He'd been suffering since Friday. I saw him Friday afternoon, and I started him on an oral antibiotic, okay? P.S. The doctor the next day, it was Thursday. And Thursday. He was on the oral antibiotic. He still felt crappy the next day. Over the weekend, he got worse. They didn't send him out. Monday, I came in. The doctor saw him on sick call. Said, it's just, gastroenteritis. It was diverticulitis. I sent him to the hospital. He spent a week and a half in the hospital, sick as a dog, on IV antibiotics, couldn't eat with an NG tube down. This guy was sick. And then he came back. He said, I saved his life. I don't think I saved his life, but he was sick. And this doctor didn't do anything. And, one of my guys came down with appendicitis. Okay, and I sent him out. And he'd been sick for 2 days with it.
I know that they don't give a shit about you in New York State prison, and there a lot of light was shed on a lot of the stuff that's been going on there when them two dudes ended up escaping from Clinton, and now all of a sudden there's some attention on the New York State prison system, and Cuomo was on the news and all of this stuff. But this is the type of shit that's been going on there for many, many years, right?
I think so. I know that they talked about those guys escaping from Clinton. And I was just like, wow, interesting. But none of the guys there would think about doing that because, for all that bad shit that went on there, most of the guys there thought they had it pretty good. They thought that they were being treated pretty good. And one of my guys told me, hey, at least I can get into the infirmary if you're on, at least I can come down and see you and I can get proper medical care. At least I know if I get cut, I'll get sent out for stitches. There's some of the nurses. One guy came to see me on night shift. Thank God he'd been cut like at noon, because he came to see me. He went to see the nurses. He was cut really bad. They wrapped him up and sent him back to his cell. He was still bleeding when I came on at 3. I sent him to the ER to get sutured. He had 14 stitches. So he comes back and I look at his arm and hey, that's pretty good. A lot of stitches there. The next day they were like, why did you send him out? He didn't need stitches. I said, he needed 14 stitches. I said, what are you, stupid?
So you end up quitting that job or whatever. You leave the job. Why did you end up leaving?
I became an FNP, and I had applied to be an FNP there, and the doctor told me I wasn't needed, I wasn't necessary, and I would be in competition with him.
Do you think that they really just disliked you?
Yeah.
And why is that?
Because I cared about the patients.
That's against the rules to care about people, huh?
Guess so. The one nurse that worked nights, I had to work for her for 2 months. This is a good story. You're gonna love this one, Chad. I had a guy that used to come down, Bill Brennan. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He killed 2 people in New York City in the 70s. There was a race killing, I guess. The girl was white and the guy was black, and he was a white supremacist, I guess. But he was a bad diabetic. And he'd been having chest pain for a day. And he went to see the nurse she was working for me because I had a class that day. Wasn't working. Well, I still feel horribly guilty over this. And I was off because I had class, and he came to sick call, and he told her he had chest pain. He was diabetic, and if a diabetic tells you they have chest pain, you do an EKG and you send them out. That's what I would do always. But she didn't do an EKG on him. She sent him back to his cell, figured it was just indigestion or something. But Bill didn't complain of much, and he hated going to the infirmary. Hated it, and avoided it unless he absolutely had to. And that night, they told her that his chest pain was worse, and they brought him back to the infirmary, and he couldn't walk. They had to wheel him down, so that's another thing that was bad. They wheeled him down, and he had a massive heart attack right in the infirmary. She never put the AED on him, so he died right in the infirmary. Finally, she shipped him out after an hour of him being in the infirmary. They were doing chest compressions on him and everything, but he died on the way to the hospital. I took one look at the EKG she got, and it showed dying heart. And I made a copy of that EKG, and I took it to a friend of mine who's a cardiologist, and she looked at it, and she was like, what the hell? Why didn't they send him out right away? I said,
did you feel like you wanted to expose the bullshit that they were doing, the corruption, the negligence, the not giving a shit about people? Did you feel that way? Like you wanted to do that?
Yeah, but nobody cared. You said something and you got punished for it. I told them they should fire her. I said I couldn't understand why she was back. I said, why didn't you fire her? She killed him. She killed a patient.
And there's no one to answer to either, right? When they do shit like that and they just let the dude die, pretty much it's over.
They yelled at me for yelling at her. I said, I swear to God, if another guy comes down here and you don't put the AED on him, okay, and I find out about it, okay, and he dies of a heart attack, I'm going to come after you.
So you were ready to go in there and start swinging them things, huh?
Yeah, ready to deck her. And she was like, "Oh, you can't do that. You're threatening me." I said, "You know what? If one of my patients dies because of you, it's going to be your fault. It's going to be on you." I said, "His death's on you." I said, "He died because of you." And everybody in the office was like, "Oh, you can't say." I said, "Yes, I can." I said, "He died because of her." And my friend Lisa was like, "Yes, he died because of you." And we both looked at her. And I said, "That's from 2 cardiac nurses, okay? Just so you know." I held up the EKG and I said, "He died because of you. This is because of you."
I've been in a few prisons where there have been a few cops or staff members that, not that you like prisoners, but that you treat people with, some sort of respect and human decency. And I've seen people be called inmate lovers and stuff like that. Did they ever try to give you a title like that?
Yeah, but that had nothing to do with it. And person is somebody's mother, brother, father, son. I would treat them the way I would want to be treated. They don't deserve any less respect than that, I mean, anybody who did anything bad, yeah, okay, you did something bad. I'm not here to judge you. That's not my job. Okay, that's God's job. I'm not here to say you did anything worse than anybody else. Okay, I'm not here to. And one of the other nurses would say, "Oh, that's so and so. He did." And I would say, "I don't want to know. I don't want to know."
Were a lot of people there interested in people's cases? Like, oh, that guy's a child molester. This guy killed so and so, or David Berkowitz, and
we had one CO would come in and she would try to go on the computers in the nurses station, and I would say, "Get out of the nurses station." "Well, I could come in here." I said, "No, you can't go on your computer. I don't want to know what the patient did. Go get out."
So, yeah, they want to check him out and stuff like that. So let's say a guy came down here and he had a bad crime, right? Let's say he was a sex offender. Would they say, "You know what? Fuck him. He's a sex offender. I don't give a shit if he lives or dies"?
Yeah, but I would say, that's not your responsibility, and I don't want to know. This is a patient. Get out of here. Are you here to protect me? And they would say, "Are you here to protect me?" "No." "Well, then go sit down." And I'd say to the patient, "What's wrong with you? What's going on?"
Let me ask you this, Gene. Were you ever worried working there? Like maybe you might have been in a dangerous situation, not just from the prisoners, but maybe from the cops because you were trying to help people?
Not really. I was Army, so I only had one patient talk really dirty to me, and I had trauma shears in my pocket, and I took them out of my pocket, and I slapped him down on the counter, and I told him, "If you keep talking dirty to me, I'll cut it off."
Whoa. You weren't playing.
He just said, "Oh, oh, oh, oh." And the officer says, "Yeah, she'll do it too. She's nuts." And the inmate was like really nice to me after that. After I came down, after that, he was real polite. He was very proper, very cooperative. Never had a problem with him after that. I never really had a problem with any of the inmates. And the officers were pretty much respectful, The funny thing was when that inmate got up in my face, all those officers came down. My medical officer was really funny. She passed away from cancer. She was very good, by the way. She was a great officer. She cared about the inmates. She says, "Yeah, all the officers that were going through bad divorces came down to protect you."
Ain't that so? So, what do you do? I mean, you end up leaving the New York State Department of Corrections. Where are you working at now?
I work for United Cerebral Palsy, but I'm in the process of moving down to North Carolina.
Okay. Did you miss the New York State Department of Corrections when you left? Did you miss working there at Shawanga?
I missed the patients. I didn't miss a lot of the staff. A lot of the good staff left. We were run off. A lot of the good nurses were told we weren't needed. We were told we weren't necessary. Our attitudes weren't necessary.
It's definitely a different place, a different world, and I know from experience that sometimes you get people on here that don't want to talk about certain things, and the cops over there are, I'm just going to say it how it is. Not all of them, but most of them are just nasty. They hate prisoners. I used to tell people New York State prison, everybody's nasty. The counselor's nasty. The case manager's nasty. The nurse is nasty. The commissary people are nasty. The chaplain's nasty. The cops are nasty. I used to think they used to teach them in their little training, like, hey, be nasty to people.
I don't know. David told me, he said, I became a CO back when you had to be a hater. And I said, "Well, are you a hater?" And he was like, "No," because that's why I work outside.
So, Jane, when you were working there, did you have to go through a training?
Yeah, but it was sort of OJT. It was like I was on the job doing the job. I mean, I came from Dutchess County Jail, and I didn't really have training for that. I mean, and I just sort of went into the job.
So New York State Department of Corrections back then, they didn't like force you to go to their little training program, like how the cops all have to go. I read that book, New Jack, and when he started working in the prison system, he had to go through this training, I think, in New York City first, and they lived in this like dorm for 4 weeks, and they learned how to be a cop. You didn't have to go through any of that stuff?
Nah, nope.
When you first start working there, do they talk to you about the safety and security of the facility?
Yeah.
So if there's ever a riot in there and they take you as a hostage, and they say, "Hey, we're going to kill her if you don't let us out," what happens? They don't.
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't think that ever. I don't think that was ever. It's a max. I mean, I don't think that would ever. I know in Attica that happened, but I think nowadays that they just go on automatic lockdown. If any kind of threat starts up like that, they would go on lockdown.
I'm pretty sure that their policy and procedure is that, hey, if someone takes you as the hostage, it don't matter. They're going to let them kill you. That's why I asked you that. I didn't know if you knew that, if you were aware of that.
Yeah, I was aware. I know that in the hospital we took care of prisoners and stuff, and they just said if you get in that situation, and they threaten, they get loose or anything, lock yourself in the bathroom. And I said, and then what happens after that? Well, pray that when they don't shoot through the door. And I was like, okay, so you're dead.
Wow. Crazy. It's crazy for you to have to, go work in a system like that. So Joyce, listen, I just want to tell you, I appreciate you coming on the show. I'm going to end the show, but I appreciate you sharing your experiences and the people that, you've been around, the things that you've seen. Cause a lot of people don't want to come on the show. I've spoke to other nurses where, they've seen cops beat people down. They're like, I don't really want to talk about it. It's like, I don't want to. And I'm like, well, we probably ain't going to be able to do the interview because these are the things that I want to talk about. I want people to see the stuff that's going on and know that this is how they treat people. So definitely appreciate you coming on.
Gene, but you're welcome.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay.
All right. So Gene, definitely appreciate you coming on. I wish you the best, with your trip and your change over to North Carolina. I'm going to close the show and tell people, man, with respect, Blood on the Razor Wire TV, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, share the video. Until tomorrow, we're out of here.